Well, welcome everyone to the virtual world of the Eastside Freedom Library. We're sorry you're not all in here with us, but I'm here along with colleagues Sang Manny Ratzabout, Carla Reilly, and Clarence White, trying to make this technology work so that we can have a good conversation today with our special guests, Dave Zirin and Mikhail Wright. We are focusing on sports, activism, and equity through a conversation with Dave and Mikhail, and then we will be inviting you to enter comments and questions in the chat on your Zoom, or if you're watching on Facebook, through the comment function. We had, as I said, hoped to have this event in person, but the resurgence of the COVID virus led us to be cautious and to do this event online. I'm thrilled to be joined virtually by my former student and colleague and someone I now look to for wisdom, Dave Zirin. Dave was named one of UTNE Reader's 50 Visionaries who are changing our world. He is the first sports editor at The Nation magazine, and he writes at The Nation. He blogs and posts at Edge of Sports. He has a very significant presence in the conversations about the place of sports in American, particularly American political life. You know that we have a lot of books here at the Eastside Freedom Library. I want to mention the titles of the books that Dave has written that we have. Bad Sports, How Owners Are Ruining the Games We Love. Brazil's Dance with the Devil, the World Cup, the Olympics, and the Fight for Democracy. Game Over, How Politics Has Turned the Sports World Upside Down. The Muhammad Ali Handbook. And I will say parenthetically that Dave just pointed out to me that though he was credited as an advisor on the Ken Burns film, he takes no responsibility for the film whatsoever. Continuing with the list of books, A People's History of Sports in the United States, 250 Years of Politics, Protest, People, and Play. Things That Make White People Uncomfortable, something jointly written with Michael Bennett, and there is now an adaptation of this book for young readers. Welcome to the Terror Dome, The Pain, Politics, and Promise of Sports. What's My Name, Fool? Sports and Resistance in the United States. The John Carlos Story, and Jim Brown, Last Man Standing. So by my count, that's 10 books. That's a pretty impressive, as we would say, oeuvre that Dave has produced. And today, at Dave's suggestion, he is being joined by Mikhail Wright. Mikhail is a PhD student in the Department of Sociology at the University of Minnesota. Her primary research focuses on the sociology of media, the sociology of mental health, collective memory and trauma, and identity. She is specifically interested in how digital communities, which can be simultaneously encouraging and hostile, constitute the identity development of Black and brown adolescent girls. Mikhail is a former Division I athlete who organized Taking a Knee in 2016 and has much to share from that experience. So what we're going to do this afternoon is Dave is going to make a presentation. Mikhail is going to respond. Then if the technology holds up, they will have a conversation. I might use my position of power and privilege to weigh in and ask a question or two, and then we will start to field the comments and questions that you might be typing in. So I'm going to shut up and disappear and leave things to my dear friend Dave Zirin. Dave.
Peter, an absolute honor to be doing this with you, to be doing this for the library. All of us are just incredibly proud about the work you've done, outside the walls of Macalester College. It's incredibly important and impressive and inspiring. So I've written book number 11. It's called The Kaepernick Effect. It's about the people themselves who took a knee after Colin Kaepernick took a knee to protest police violence and racial inequity. And I think that this issue of Colin Kaepernick and why people take a knee is so important because I'm so scared that this is going to get memory hold. This idea of all these hundreds, if not thousands, of young athletes who took a knee after Colin Kaepernick, because it constitutes something bigger than just Colin Kaepernick. It constitutes a national movement, and even more than just a national movement. See, let me take a step back and explain why I decided to write this book in the first place. I was having a conversation with John Carlos, the 1968 Olympian who, of course, raised his fist on the medal stand. And John Carlos said to me, you know what, Dave? So many people raised their fists at track meets around the country after we raised our fists in Mexico City. And the very amateur historian in me was like, what? People raised their fists in 1968 at athletic events. I didn't know that part of the story. And I thought I knew the whole story because I wrote John Carlos's memoir with him. And when I started to investigate that, I came up against the dead end that you might imagine, since it's been over 50 years since 68. But it did make me think long and hard about all these stories of young people who took a knee. And usually these things are kind of what you would call a one-off story. Like there would be a story about this high school in Detroit, or that high school in Minneapolis, this middle school in Beaumont, Texas, that college in Idaho. All of these different places about, athletes who just said enough is enough and they took a knee. And for me, like my head was just like, oh my goodness, we need something that's holistic. We need something that covers all of this and tells it as one cohesive history of this revolt of young athletes, a revolt of a generation on the athletic fields of this country. So I started working on the book at the start of the pandemic, and that was actually a lot easier than you might think, because all these high school and college kids who I wanted to talk to who took a knee, a lot of them were at home and happy to talk, because that was when we were all really shut down and hunkered down inside. And, people usually, I don't know about your dealings with young folks, but, usually it's a text or nothing. You call and they think it's an emergency of some kind, like you're trapped under a couch or something. I know when I call my 17-year-old daughter, she's usually like, hello, what's wrong? I'm like, nothing's wrong. She goes, oh, I thought it was an emergency because you were calling. So the phone call is a delicate thing to the generation younger than myself. But I was able to really connect with these young folks because they were home and very bored, and they shared a lot with me about their experience taking a knee. And then I realized that the far more interesting story wasn't the taking of the knee and what led up to that, but the aftermath. And that's certainly true in Mikhail's case. And it was such an honor and a privilege to interview Mikhail as part of this project. But I was really into the aftermath because I started teasing out common threads of all these different stories. And let's be clear, people took a knee in red states, blue states, rural areas, urban areas. You're kidding me. Hello? I hope I'm still here. That was a disaster.
You're good. I can hear you, Dave.
I don't know what happened there. My computer just shorted out. But if I'm still here and still going, I'm gonna just keep talking, if that's all right. Peter's looking at me like I'm 19 in a class I'm not understanding, but trying to BS my way through it. But I want to be very clear about like what's not BS at all is just talking to these young people and really speaking with them and learning something about their experience. And that even changed in the summer of 2020. In the summer of 2020, you had of course, the largest demonstrations in the history of the United States after the police murder of George Floyd, as folks in the Twin Cities know all too well. And I got in touch with a lot of the folks that I'd been interviewed, and all of them were in the struggle, were in the movement. And that was incredibly impressive to me, because it got me realizing that, while many roads may have led us to the summer of 2020, one of them runs through the athletic fields of the United States. And, that to me made me realize that, okay, what we're dealing with right now in this country is nothing less than a generational movement, as much as it is anything else. And I feel like in the future, what we're looking at is a collision course between Mitch McConnell's America and, for lack of a better word, Colin Kaepernick's America. Or even better than saying Colin Kaepernick's America, I want to say Trayvon Martin's America. Because when I spoke to the young folks about this book, the name that they kept summoning was that of Trayvon Martin as something generational that made them feel like they had to do something. And, when Colin Kaepernick took that knee, it really made them realize that there was something that they could do. And that's all I've got to say. I want to stop there because I'm far more interested in what Mikhail has to say than what I have to say.
You make me sound so much cooler than I actually am, Dave. It's not right. Well, I'm so grateful and excited to be here today. The power of media got connected with Dave through a tweet that got shared with me. And, it was like a shot in the dark. Like, sure, yeah, like this is a really cool project. I'd love to, work with that. And then I just kind of started, reflecting. It was a rough time for me at Santa Barbara. So I should backtrack. I did 4 years. I played basketball at UC Santa Barbara. And it was, exactly what anyone would hope it would be, a great location, get to play basketball for, a majority of my day. That's what I came for. That was like, my dedicated reason to being there. And then, I was finally feeling in a place that I was like doing what I wanted to do in school. I was excelling. I was interested in my classes. It was all kind of working out. I then, the summer of 2016, I, met with, we had like a rough summer. It was Philando Castile, Terrence Crutcher, I think, and Austin Sterling, maybe all three like in weeks apart. And I remember getting an email from my coach checking in with me, and I was like, you know what, like, a couple of us have been talking. I really want to talk to you about something that's going on. And, for the most part, they were all ears. They were wanting to support this movement, wanting to support where we stood. And I understood that. I mean, the majority of the team is Black women at this point. There's 13 of us, 9 of us are Black women, really, really sitting with this, right? This is the first time. I remember the year before sitting with my teammates talking about Sandra Bland and what that meant. And the year before that, it's every year for us. Every year, it was even seeming like every summer. It was a lot. Like, we're connecting over the summer, our time that's supposed to be our rest and our break, to mourn, to feel sad, to check in, to make sure that we're okay with what's going on in the world. So we decided what we're going to do, what's best for us, is to have some sort of demonstration. That's what needed to happen. And we, met with it as a team, and we felt passionately about kneeling. We had just gotten back. Colin Kaepernick had just kneeled, and we had just started summer trainings, summer workouts, and things like that. We talked, we chatted. We seemed to have an understanding of where people were and how they felt. I remember, some tears, some hugs. It was okay for the time being for us. As time got closer to the start of the season, I think people got a little bit more weary about the plan. We had one more final meeting about what we were going to do, and it became a 50-50 split. I would say more than a 50-50 split. About 70-30. 70% of us saying we're doing it, like we're kneeling, this is it, it's happening. the 30% saying we just don't feel comfortable doing that. You know, I remember some of the responses. So there's a time and place for everything. A time and place. My grandfather's in the military. I just don't believe kneeling is the right approach. And for some of us, it was like, okay, it's time to step up to the table, and people are backing down. So I think at a standstill with a game the next day, we decided that pretty much to each their own, right? If you want to kneel in this game, please do. If you don't, we can find a way to understand, knowing that you support us in this movement. The next day came. I remember being nervous. I didn't feel like anybody was going to back down. I just didn't know what was going to happen. These people have seen me. I'm a senior. These people have seen me for 4 years. I wasn't sure. I talked to my parents about it. Their support, friends' support. We get out there. They say, please rise to the national anthem. 8 of us kneel. And I think that moment is when it really sinks in. There's booing, people leaving the stands, people throwing things. I mean, I don't want to be not throwing rocks, but water bottles. A couple of cuss words being thrown around. The biggest thing was watching people that I've sat at their house for dinner. They've taken me places. They come to visit me. They make sure I'm good when we're traveling. They're my support system through this program. And watching them leave the gym, shaking their head, just completely disappointed. And I think that really set the tone for the year to come. I think, I don't want to give it all away right now, because I know Dave and I are just going to go back and forth and talk. But I remember this feeling I had at the end, right? So, we played. Actually, I think we had like a great game. We blew the team out. It was this high energy. And we got in the locker room celebrating, but you could see the difference. It was like celebrating a win, but kind of suffering with this loss that needs to be addressed. And I remember telling one of my coaches, we're in the huddle, we're next to each other, and I'm just like, thinking. She's like, you good? And I'm like, yeah, I'm just really, I said I couldn't believe they were going to act that way. I feel kind of blindsided. She looked at me and said, well, what did you think they were going to do? Like, what would you expect? That was expected of them. But not that's expected of them because of who they are. But she seemed to be saying, that's exactly what I knew was going to happen. I would react the same way. It was a different kind of vibe. And I think from that moment on, it was, a rough but strong year. And a lot of things happened, but I'm going to stop for now and I guess see where Dave and I are going to go. Oh no, I can't hear. Dave, can you hear me? I can't hear you.
How about now?
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Well, I was just saying how horrified I was by your presentation. No, I'm just kidding. I was saying.
I'm going to end it. I'm exiting.
Yeah, no, just glory. Glory be. Like, I'm so grateful that we were able to connect, and that you're a part of this book. Your experience honors the book, and I just very much appreciate you for being a part of it. But I wanted to ask you, a big theme in the book that a lot of folks have picked up on is the theme of coaching, and how you really do have two different kinds of coaches, is the way a former Baltimore Colt named Joe Ehrman always taught it to me. He said, you've got transactional coaches and transformational coaches. The transactional coach is in it for really what's in it for them personally, or what's in it for the institution. Because they know that transactionally will benefit them. A transformational coach is somebody whose first priority is always the students under their charge, and is about trying to mature people, no matter what their age, hold up a standard that makes them become better people. And that's the big difference. What kind of, I would like you to speak about your coaches, if you don't mind. And you don't have to use that framework of transactional and transformational, but But if you could speak about the relationship with your coaches, not just when it happened, but years down the line as well.
Right. And I think that is what made this so hard. Uh, I felt like we had a transformational coaching staff and it maybe turned into transactional. Um, I think that I prided myself on, being that someone, like as a captain, I was someone that I could talk to. My coach could talk to me. I could talk to my coach, and felt open about that. And it stayed like that. We started this conversation. They were engaged with this conversation. They wanted to support us in any way possible. And I always say when crap hit the fan, it really kind of became okay. Like for some of us, with nothing to lose, it seemed as though like let's drop it. And it's like this isn't something we just up and drop, right? Went through this standstill period where it's like we were basically asked, well, what else is to come? What else are you going to do? Are you just going to kneel all season? And it was like, well, when you put it, no, but we haven't really gotten anywhere. We've had a bunch of meetings, we've had diversity meetings and team meetings and sessions and tiers and fights. And so at this point, we haven't gotten anywhere. There was this little period where it was like, let's just try to not kneel for this amount of time. It was in exchange for not kneeling. I would think it was like from mid-November to the end of December. They were going to work out some, maybe we could do shirts, or maybe we can do patches, or maybe we could do. There was something, and it came down to it that it wasn't actually supported in that way. And if this was something we wanted to do, it was on us. Athletic department said this is not something that we're supporting. This is not coming down from us and saying that we're allowing this. And it became, okay, so what are you guys going to do? And I think that's what was hard, because it went from having this support system. I remember, the frustrations were high, practices were quiet. And the coach turned from someone I felt like I could go to someone who were treating us like children, right? Yelling and if I'm a grown up. I'm a grown up. I always tell my mom I'm a grown up, and as an adult I've always talked to you like an adult, and now you're talking to me like I'm a freshman, someone who doesn't know what's going on, someone who's not about to go into the real world and do these things that I'm setting out to do. So that was really tough for I think a lot of us. It felt like that respect level, it just wasn't the same anymore. Yeah.
But then, your coach contacted you in 2020, right?
Yeah. So I guess basically after we decided, what, screw it, we're gonna do the thing. We put a lot of work into it. We set we called it our social injustice awareness game, and we wrote this kind of one pager and put it out. And I had my mom, my sister, other the BSU. A lot of organizations going out and helping us. We said, come to our game, wear all black and kneel with us, or sit. We had a section of people who were dedicated to that. And it meant the world to us. And I think a lot of people didn't think it would happen. I remember horror stories, people throwing the papers away and things like that. So for me personally, that's what I remember. I remember leaving and kind of not talking to coaches. They weren't really so much interested in what was next for me, and I was okay with that. I told myself I was moving on. Basketball and athlete was something I was. I'm going to grad school. This is my new leaf. So I kind of didn't really talk about it. I had my things that had happened in life like everyone else, and that was the end of it. 2020 came. George Floyd came. It was just a rough time to be here in the world, right? But it's I always tell people it's so different when it's outside. I don't even know how to explain it. You're watching it on TV and knowing, I drive down that street. I go to that Target. I've been right there. It's completely different. But it was a call. I remember seeing the call and I was just kind of like, um, okay, I'm gonna wait, see what it is. I even called. Hey, did so and so call you? Yeah, they called me. I didn't answer. Oh, okay, well I'm gonna call back and see what's up. I called and it was a 20-minute phone call, checking in. How am I? kind of, I guess, trying to get a feel for what's going on here in the cities, which to me was, a little weird because I know they have connections here. Their families from here. So I'm the last person you should be calling to find out what's going on in, a place where your family is. But okay, it's cool. Things are this, that, and the other. And then it kind of ended with, I've really taken the time to learn, to understand what's happening. And while I do get that, I feel like I wasn't asking. We, as women on the team, weren't asking for much. We were asking for support. Um, it. I had a hard time taking in, like, I had to really sit and study and understand what Black Lives Matter means. What it means to know that Black people shouldn't be dying in the streets. I've never felt like I had to sit and study that. I didn't have to Google it and research it. That was enough for me, knowing that Black lives should be mattering, period. There was no clause connected to that. So, that was kind of the end of it. And then I guess now reflecting, it's been a year, I've seen, um, you know, more activism, more movements. Had some former teammates reach out to me and ask, like, what I needed from them in support. And I was like, you know what, I don't need anything. Oh, well, like, I'm working on this. Can you let me know, like, how it sounds? I can't do this new work for you now that you want to be on board. So that was tough. I think that was tough for me because now it's like, we're social justice activists in this way, and we're doing all these things to support this cause, which I applaud now in a space where I'm like, I'm glad that you're having this social justice walk and awareness and having small things, and Black Lives Matter shirts are easy to put on and take pictures for, but this is not the same 4 years ago, and that's the crazy thing about it. It was 4 years later. So there's a new girls who might not know that experience, but those coaches are still there, right? And I just can't imagine that they can just sit and think about the 4 years and think this is okay. It was tough for a lot of us. Like, I mean, I don't think any of us, we don't check into alumni games. We don't, we didn't leave with that great taste, right? It was a very bitter taste for a long time. It was easy to avoid going to those things.
And it sounded like your coach had given you multiple burdens over the years. Like, first, the burden of having to explain something that frankly should be obvious. And then the burden for you to, I guess, forgive them or offer some sort of, that's also putting a burden on you instead of them doing what I think the demand of the movement needs to be, which is that this needs to be a shared burden if we're ever going to end this kind of indiscriminate police violence.
Right. And that's something I had to deal with. I was like, well, it's people change. We're living in a new space. This is a new, 4 years ago, I wouldn't be doing this or that, but I had to really sit, and talk to people who were there 4 years ago, my partner who was there 4 years ago, and remembering what I was going through in that time, how tough it was. Like my parents, my sister, talking to them, and it's like, this one isn't on you, Mikhail. Like, this one can't be on you. Even though I felt that pull to be like, you know what, that weird feeling where you're like, well, at least they're listening now. At least they're trying now. Like, let's move forward. And I wasn't ready to do that. I couldn't let that go. I think for me personally, it was, we were still, young adults being molded, and we confided and trusted this space. This was family. These were my sisters. This was like people that I would go to for things, and I just felt so isolated. Isolated within small groups. I remember one time we were traveling, and the six of us, all Black women, were like just talking about like how uncomfortable it felt, and it became this issue that we were separating people. And it's like, I'm not purposely separating anybody. I don't feel comfortable anymore having this conversation with people that I used to have this conversation with. So like dealing with that was just really, really tough. And trying to decide now, if, in 2020, is this something worth giving is it a wound worth reopening? And it didn't feel like it. It just wasn't worth it.
Mm, I get you definitely on that front. You said something that really caught my ear because I heard this in some of the other interviews that I did, where you said they, raised the issue of maybe you could wear T-shirts, or maybe, you could bow your heads and hold hands during the anthem. I mean, so much is put forward to prevent that one gesture of taking a knee, which is, a gesture of humility and prayer. What is it in your mind about taking a knee that so seems to upset the people who are the minders of normality, the people who are in charge of the status quo? I mean, it drives them to fits of either it drives them to fits of distraction, or it drives them to fits of panic that other people are going to be upset by it. Like, but T-shirts are fine. Holding hands is fine. What do you think it is about the gesture which puts them on edge?
I've really tried to think about it, and I'm still not sure what it is. I'm wondering if it's this. I mean, because the military myth was debunked, right? Like Colin Kaepernick said, "Well, no, I met with someone and I did sit the first time, and then they said, hey, that's kind of disrespectful. Maybe you could kneel." And it was like, okay, well, like this is a conversation we're having and something that I can make work. So I heard, I remember, well, my grandfather's in the military and he comes to this game, and I was like, well, my father is a vet also, right? And I mean, we have to drop this. This can't be the reason, right? I remember we were asked, and I mean, we were asked to not kneel when we had a veterans game, a game on
Mm,
Veterans Day in Iowa. I think it was Iowa. It's just not the time and place, especially not on Veterans Day. And this has nothing to do with the
yeah.
veterans. But I think the issue is, and when it came down to it, I think of the position of power. This was something that Colin Kaepernick and athletes came up with, but we stuck with it. Like, this is the thing we're doing. But also, when it came down to it, the other things weren't really given either. We were even willing to put it on hold for shirts, but we couldn't wear Black Lives Matter shirts. Let's do patches. Some people felt uncomfortable with patches. It got down to, so we were, and I regret this, that we were so willing to take a little bit. It was like, well, let's just put a black band right here on our jersey. And, even that, we were willing to be like, okay, something to get us all on the same page. And even that was a no when it came down to it, right? So, parents, one of my teammates, her parent uh, purchased Black Lives Matter shirts for all of us because we didn't have them. And another parent, asked us if we needed help with any printing. I was the night before at Office Depot running 500 copies of our statement and letter. And, it became very, if you want to get this done, do it yourself. I'm not sure though what that knee really ticks people off. And I just haven't quite placed it. And I'm thinking that it's maybe having this power, right? Like, I'm setting out to do something. This person who, you think is just an athlete, right? I always told them, like, they don't understand, because after these games, when I take off the jersey and put on a sweatshirt and sweatpants that don't have any affiliation with the university, and I'm walking home, no one stops me or cares about me because I play on this team, or no one stops me and cares about me because I scored 10 points tonight. No one stops me and cares about me because I've done this, and this community event at the Boys and Girls. They don't care. I'm another Black person walking home that day. I'm not an athlete. I'm not a captain. I'm none of those things. And I feel like that sense of power that athletes were given with this movement is what really kind of shook the table.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have no idea either. I mean, the psyche of the right wing in this country, it never ceases to make me wonder, like, where logic ends and fantasy begins. But so who knows what it is about the knee that specifically tickles the most reptilian part of the lizard brain. But I do have a couple of just random theories that one is, I think that the people who want to preserve this quote, preserve rights, police, and do whatever the hell they want, and preserve power structures and power arrangements that do exist in sports, I think they fear it because it's so easy to replicate. I mean, and they intuit the power of it as a symbolic image. So, that is what I argue in the book. Like that's Colin Kaepernick's sort of gift to the movement is not so much a set of politics as it is a method by which you as an athlete can showcase your dissent with the world. Like, because so many of the people I talked to were already upset and already looking to do something. And then they see Colin Kaepernick do that. And it's like, oh, eureka, I can do that. Light bulb going off over the head. That's something I can do. So I think that that's part of it is fear of its ability to replicate itself. I also think that they see it as an affront. Like in the old days when if a social bettor is crossing the street and you're crossing the street and you choose not to get out of the way, that's about a lot more than just maybe a little dust on your shoe. That's all of a sudden you're actually messing with the whole order of things, and now you're pulling the string on a sweater, and who knows where the hell that's going to end. Because I mean, the NFL in particular, and the NFL is such a powerful cultural foghorn in this country. It absolutely depends on labor and racial discipline in order to survive and be this multi-billion-dollar business. And so Colin Kaepernick takes that knee, other players take that knee, and we all saw it. Like this was, this was like someone saying the emperor had no clothes. Like everybody was shocked because it's like, that's just not what you're supposed to do. It reminded me of the Muhammad Ali quote where he said, "I don't have to be what you want me to be." And once you start saying that in the NFL, it gets really dangerous because this is, and not just for the National Football League, because this is the number one entertainment that we have in this country by any measure of ratings or interest or interaction. And it's also built on this really profound racial contradiction of, you have 70% of the athletes are Black, and yet you look at the number of the people who have ownership papers of the franchises. There's no one who is Black in those positions. And if you look at coaches and executives, it's absolutely embarrassing. And all of these things get challenged when Colin takes that knee. And I think that's also something people intuited because they all found out too. It's amazing. Like what happened in the NFL replicated itself in cities and towns around the country where, that knee hits the ground and the next thing you know, it's on basically. And that's quite a story. And it was a story. I personally just felt like wasn't being told.
But I agree. I think I just, like you said, it's this, I think you said it first. The first thing you said was just this power to say, I don't like what's going on here. And I even think a lot of people were so quick to tell, Cap to, well, if you don't like it, if you don't like it, you don't have to be here. If you don't like what we do here in the NFL, you don't have to be here. And, we say that for everything. It's not that simple. I mean, on a scale of, it's so easy to say, well, they're making millions of dollars. They're this, that, and the other. But I mean, I could make a single million to be, there. And, I still even got, well, they pay for you're on a full ride. You should be grateful for this opportunity, not so quick to tarnish it. Right. And I'm like, I am grateful for this opportunity. So grateful that I've been in this position to feel comfortable in voicing concerns with things I have. I've made it to this point, and like I said, my last year that I feel comfortable calling up a coach to say, "Hey, this is what's going on." Excuse me. I feel comfortable talking to my teammates and saying, "Hey, what are people thinking about this? Like, how are we going to work this out?" I've grown in this space, and to then say, stop growing. But this is enough. You've gone too far. You've taken this too far. It sucked. That's just the basic way I can think of saying it sucked to get that response. I even feel like it was kind of back and forth. I felt like some days they were supportive, some days they weren't. If they got a call from a booster about them pulling money, maybe that was the day they weren't supportive. If, someone said, well, this will die down, maybe that was the day they just decided they were going to stay on our side lightly, but, tread lightly as well. So it was just, it was tough knowing that, when it comes time to me, you know, stepping up and feeling comfortable in that space, that the people who were supposed to support that kind of did the complete opposite.
You just said two things that also come through in the book with a interesting commonality in terms of the response to people. The first is, and I know you get it as college athletes, but you hear it at the pro level and even at the high school level, this idea of gratitude. And why aren't you grateful? And it's this idea of, you're playing a sport and therefore you should be thanking everyone around you every day for the opportunity to be able to live in this toy department of life where you're playing this sport as if blood, sweat, and tears didn't get you to that point. Yeah. And that gratitude trope has been practically exclusively levied against the Black athlete. It's like, how, by white commentary, like, how are you not grateful for everything we have given you with, and there's so much paternalism and in that approach. The other thing that you said that relates to this very strongly is when people have said to Kaepernick, like, why don't you just leave the job? Donald Trump said, why don't you just leave the country? And it's that other great stick that's been used against Black athletes, which is and actually I should say Black rebels, which is the question of citizenship. And are you really a citizen of this country if you criticize it? While the other side would say that, criticism and protest is actually the first duty in a free society. But, but the other side, which I guess supports, that level of freedom when it's about ransacking the Capitol building, but when it's about fighting against racism, fighting for the most basic anti-racist legislation, human rights, fighting against qualified immunity for the police, like these, fundamental issues which have been taken up by the movement. It's not just let's agree to disagree or let's have the debate out, not even close. Instead, it's you are not from here. Who are you to weigh in on what this country should be when you are not of this country? I mean, there's a cruelty to it. And and I'm so surprised, I shouldn't be, that it keeps getting used into 2021. I mean, we're talking, over a century of this, dating back, going straight antebellum, if we want to, about this. And it's time to say enough, absolutely. And we got to cut these tropes when they're levied against athletes, because they'll be used against people well in the world of sports.
Absolutely. And I always said it wasn't, I always say, if a kindergartner or a fifth grader is running for student council, right, and they want to be the president, they promise the school, we'll have pizza every day for lunch. Don't worry about it, right? Like, that's not going to happen. It's a far-fetched dream for anyone, especially a fifth grader trying to get votes, right? But I just don't feel like asking for, equality and for Black annihilation in the streets to stop. Like, that doesn't seem like such an ask. And that's what always sits with me. That's not this massive thing that we must, address and just change. Like, it shouldn't be this complicated or this hard for people to understand that we don't want to die, and that's when that's what it boils down to. Like, we don't want to fear living every day because killing us doesn't matter to you or it doesn't matter to the rest of the world and the country, right? And that's just tough. That's a tough space to live in. I'm just thinking about, times I've been pulled over in Santa. It's just like this very tough feeling that a lot of people are living with every day, having to prove that I'm supposed to be here, that this life that I live is worth living. It doesn't seem fair. It isn't fair. Um,
You know, it's so funny. I was just thinking about this conversation. One thing, Mikhail, that we are sort of assuming among our listening audience is that they agree with us that sports is a perfectly appropriate place to have these kinds of political demonstrations. Like that's sort of been our starting point for this whole conversation. Like, and maybe we moved a little fast. So what do you say when people say to you even something like, I agree with this, your struggle, but sports, that should be a politics free zone? What do you say to that?
well, it's not politics. We play the national anthem anyway. We
Yeah.
have veterans games anyway. So I mean, we can't pick and choose when we decide we want to be, political or not political. Um, And I think, that's been, as you know, Dave, I'm a big LeBron fan, the whole shut up and dribble, that whole movement. This isn't where we talk about politics. And like, you're not a politician. You don't need to discuss this. Um, I would say like this is political, yes, but this is also livelihood. We're at the point where Black people are being murdered. This shouldn't be Black Lives Matter has become this controversial statement. I was in a class and someone said this may be controversial, but and it's like this doesn't have to be controversial. This dealing with these things are not controversial. Talking about this out loud shouldn't be controversial. We realistically should not be fighting over if Black Lives Matter or not. Black Lives Matter, well, all lives matter. This has become political. This wasn't that, and now it is that. So that's what I say. It's like, well, we wouldn't have a national anthem to kneel at if there wasn't a national anthem. So we can't pick and choose which ones work because they make you comfortable or uncomfortable. Even now, I still don't stand for the national anthem. People don't like that, but at live games, people are walking and eating popcorn and
Mhm.
on the phone, waving down the person so they can come sit with them. But me taking a moment um, to not stand really just puts it over. So I think, we got to keep the energy consistent if that's how we feel about it. But I think it's not that. It's so deeply rooted, a deeply rooted issue that people want to act like don't exist, but it does.
It's like I try to explain it to people like people who say sports and politics shouldn't mix. What they're really saying is sports and a certain kind of politics shouldn't mix because they're all for the politics that dovetail with their own ideas about patriotism, about militarism, about U.S. supremacy. I mean, these things, when represented before sporting events, are treasured by some of the same people who tell what really amounts to black athletes to shut up and play, shut up and dribble. And they fear someone like LeBron James more than
Hmm.
they loathe someone like LeBron James. It's a fear factor. First of all, his even when Trump was still on Twitter, his social media reach was bigger than Donald Trump's, and that made him mad. And he's a bizarre child.
I'll never forget when LeBron called Donald Trump a bum. That
You
might
bum.
be you bum. And like so many people I understand that. That is we laughed because it was funny, but we all felt the same way. Like
So good.
at this point, like I agree. I agree. You're absolutely right. So it's just I think that's a good point. Like, this fear that knowing that we could stop being athletes and really change the world. I just really like to, play basketball. That LeBron just really likes to play basketball, but that doesn't mean, that's all he should be doing, right? And I think this fear that now, you know what, I do more. I'm engaged in. That's not saying that people weren't doing that, right? But it's like I can and I will because I want to, right? And that component I think is what's scary for some people. That
Hmm.
I play this game and then I'm on my way to doing something else, and people are listening to me and people are listening to us and getting ramped up and engaged. So I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, and I'm not going to do a compare and contrast like who has meant more to the movement or anything, but when we talk about Colin Kaepernick, amazing, particularly to me, the most amazing part of his legacy is the ripple effect that I write about in the book. But we also can't ignore what LeBron James's very political presence has to the NBA. And I've gotten in debates and arguments about this with other folks because they think LeBron should do more, or he didn't do something at this point, didn't say anything at this point. And I want to say, look, he's not Mandela. He's a basketball player. He's not going to get all of this right all of the time. But the fact that he was willing to stand up and be political after the murder of Trayvon Martin in 2012, that's what really changed the game. That was 4 years before Colin Kaepernick took a knee, when LeBron James posed with his teammates all wearing hoodies on the Miami Heat. And that was really the first sports politics photo to go viral on social media. And I just believe that what LeBron did was he bent the entire NBA to being a more politically open organization, because once you have the player of their generation speaking out, it's a lot more difficult to make everyone else just shut up and dribble. And I think that's one of the things that so enraged the Fox News Nation, with their 50-state Southern strategy, because when you have one individual who can change the political culture of an entire sports league, I mean, all of a sudden that person becomes not so much an athlete that you like or dislike, but an athlete that you are for or against. And I guess I'm not just saying that to the right wing. I'm saying that to all the people around me who've argued with me about LeBron's influence. It's like, you got to realize that, fine, you don't like LeBron. You didn't like him in this series. You didn't like the way he left Cleveland. You didn't like what he's done with the Lakers, whatever. You have to realize that, like, when it comes to LeBron, it is about, are you for the presence of LeBron or against the presence of LeBron? Because they're going after him.
Yeah, and I think I just think, like, you're right, that was such a monumental moment. And we are having these moments. I was maybe at the last talk that we had, but we were just talking about the Minnesota Lynx and what that meant in 2016 with Philando Castile. And they played a great game, and went to the press, and it was, oh well, it was Maya Moore, Lindsay Whalen, Simone Augustus, Rebecca Brunson. Well, let's talk about the game. How do you feel? And they said, well, we don't have to talk about the game. You watched the game. Let's talk about Philando Castile and that Black Lives Matter, and we need to be doing more. And and it was silent in that room after the game. It was no one knew what to say. And I mean, it got heated. The ripple effect of that was the security decided they're not coming to any more Lynx games. They're not showing up because they don't feel respected. And that line is just being missed. I say Black Lives Matter, and security and police officers picked up that I don't respect them, and that they should just not come to the game. And it's like, it has nothing to do with you. This isn't about you. This is about the respect and care of Black life.
Mm.
And again, that was the first time we've seen something like that, where, especially for now, 4 years later, during a pandemic, we have the wobble, and they've completely taken on justice for Breonna Taylor and are on one accord, and everyone is on the same page. They're calling Breonna Taylor's mom. They're calling Black Lives Matter activists. They're talking with Angela Davis. They're creating these conversations. They're doing more than just dribbling and shooting, but they're making a wave of change. And that I'm giving COVID some of that credit because it was in this small space. They all go to the same hotel, come back, but still, it was something we've never seen before. And then, this is a shameless plug for everyone to go watch the ESPN 144 documentary about the Wubble and the WNBA and what that meant for the Players Association to then be on one accord with players and people outside, and the public and everybody making this movement, but this is just something. It's a new wave for so many of us, I think. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and
That's
current athletes, former athletes, I think everyone's on board in a way we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I say to folks all the time, the wine's out of the bottle on this. So, whether there's a period of lower struggle or higher struggle coming up, the point is that we're in a different kind of era with athletes as far as how they see themselves politically relative to the world. And, people are going to have to get with that. And, you see the Republican Party trying to figure out how to get with that, running Herschel Walker for Senate in Georgia. And that Senate seat in Georgia is something they want because that's a WNBA story too. I mean, they flipped the dang Senate, for goodness sakes. No WNBA.
I say that all the time.
With his polling at 9%. Polling at 9%.
9%. I remember seeing those shirts. Vote Warnock. Everyone went to Google. And I always tell people, like, it's tough. We down for the WNBA because it seems like it's this silo, People who watch the WNBA are probably pro list of things that are going wrong in the, like trying to change the world anyway. But we've seen it. It doesn't just stay in the WNBA. If that were the case, the Senate wouldn't have happened. It started, like you said, 9%. And after that, it's like, it jumped to like 30%. After they had their first Vote Warnock and their Loeffler shirts and things like that, like it transpired and completely changed the game. And I think we can sit back and say that things happened and people had their roles, but the WNBA also had a role. Stacey Abrams had a role, and the local activists had a role, but the WNBA and the Atlanta Dream also had a very large role in that.
Absolutely. When the story is written, that needs to be front and center. Because there's also then the role they played in politicizing the atmosphere of the Wubble, because they were in close contact with the NBA players as well during that time. And, when I interviewed several of the players who were at the front of the Endorse Warnock campaign, it was really interesting that they said, it wasn't just about endorsing him. It was getting on the Zoom calls with him and trying to shape his politics. So, this is what it means to be a true political actor and not just somebody using your sports platform to amplify the ideas of others, but using it as a method for your own action, which is amazing. Well, Mikhail, we've been rolling for an hour. It's felt like 5 minutes. And I guess this would be a time where we see if there are any questions, call upon Peter to join us. How you doing, Peter?
I'm doing great. Love listening to you both. It takes me back, if I can reminisce for a moment, that in the fall of 1968, when I was a senior in high school in New London, Connecticut, my peers and I stopped standing for the national anthem at high school basketball games. We stopped reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag in the classroom. I was called into the principal's office, and he actually asked me, where did I get these ideas? Was I learning this at the synagogue? Which was quite a revelation to me. And I wonder, I've come around over all these years as a historian to say that history is the study of change. History is not just the study of the past, but it's a way of thinking about change. And I wanted to ask the two of you, what do you think has changed? Are we in a different moment in 2021 than I was in 1968? How have things changed? Have they progressed? Have they gotten deeper? Have we had to reinvent? And so I wanted to start out by asking the two of you, What do you think has changed over the last half century or not? Particularly in protest, we know that white supremacy, institutionalized racism, racial capitalism, that's still with us. But are the politics of protest changing?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I think for me, like I said, I study and kind of really interested in the power of social media. So that's my immediate. That's what's changed for me, right? What used to be could only happen if you were there in real time. Now we have archives through hashtags, and we can go back and look at what people are saying and doing in this moment. And I just, I've talked about this before. It's really hard, it's hard every time we see another one of these, um, murders, because it's like, well, when are things going to change? And, this has been happening for so long. And, we're in a space that's both so different, and we know that, but it's also so hard to feel that you're still in that same space. It's a constant back and forth I have with myself and, my colleagues and my peers. And it's just, how is it that I feel that we're in both spaces, that we're moving forward and making change, but stuck in what was happening, before I was here, before my parents were here, before, some of these things are really similar to moments I couldn't even imagine, right? So how are we supposed to live with this constant push pull? But yeah, things are always changing, and I think for me, I would just short and sweet say that we're in a different ball game when social media is involved.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly where I was going to go. I mean, the phenomenon of social media has meant, I think, something very different, Peter, when it comes to the concept of solidarity and what solidarity can look like, how quickly it can disseminate, and how quickly it can grow. I mean, I interviewed, because of the horrors of how the Haitian asylum seekers are being treated at the border. I interviewed this past week a Haitian former NBA player named Olden Polynice, who in the early 1990s, when Bill Clinton reneged on his promise to allow access for HIV positive Haitian refugees to come into the United States, Olden Polynice went on an in-season hunger strike in the NBA in protest. Now, you don't hear about that story because it was forgotten. And when it was written about, he was excoriated by the local press because he was being selfish and bringing politics into sports. And, how's he supposed to play center if he's not eating and all this stuff like that? Imagine if that happened today. Imagine if a player had the courage to go on a hunger strike because of how we are treating the Haitian asylum seekers, to use one example. That person going on a hunger strike would surely be, they would attempt to devour him on Fox News and Fox News's various, leavings of other networks and whatever. But on social media, there would be like hashtags of support. There would be love being given, and there would be given the kind of a kind of backbone to keep going, which just frankly didn't exist in decades past. And I think that makes a bigger difference than I think people realize. One thing about being an athlete is that you have a lot of downtime, and a lot of times what they're doing is scrolling through their mentions, wondering what people are saying in this big public sphere that is social media. And so that's something that I think has been an absolute game changer. I would call it the dissemination of not just solidarity, but also information. Like, it's when I first got into these politics of thinking of sports and politics, I couldn't Google athlete politics struggle because there was no Google, there was no social media. So I, had to do like my own research. But today, if there's an athlete who's interested in these issues or wants to know what John Carlos and Tommy Smith were all about, it's at their fingertips. And that I think strongly changes the contours of struggle. There are areas where we're far ahead to go directly to your question, Peter, about where we were in 1968, there are areas there where actually 1968 we would be doing a lot better. Particularly, I'm thinking of the integration of the labor movement with the broader left. But I'm happy with where we are because the process of doing in this book put me in touch with a generation of people who I just feel like aren't going to settle for what their parents and grandparents were willing to settle for. I mean, they seem so much more engaged on the question of substantive change that's not piecemeal. That I find to be incredibly inspiring.
Maybe we can go a little bit further on this question about younger athletes and the intergenerational transmission of ideas. And I think that we often, as much as we don't want to be top down, we tend to be like, you should listen to the dude with wisdom. And I remember about the time, Dave, that you were at Macalester, that we were having a series of labor conferences. And there was a group of young people that became a labor theater group, the Solidarity Kids Theater. And I made the mistake of introducing them at a conference as the leaders of tomorrow. And one of the kids took me aside and said, "We're the leaders of today. We're not the leaders of tomorrow." And I wonder, you started out today, Dave, talking about, that you wanted to interview younger athletes about the impact that Kaepernick's action and the idea of protest, how it was captivating them. And I think you and I are of a different generation, and Mikhail is of yet another generation. And I wonder how the two of you think about, sort of where the ideas are coming from in this younger generation, and maybe what us older folks, we're all older than somebody, what us older folks can learn from the way younger people are approaching the challenges that they face in making the world the kind of place that they want to live in.
What a beautifully put question. Mikhail, do you want to start on that?
It's got me. In true top-down fashion, you should go first.
All right. I mean, I live with a 17-year-old who's politically very engaged, and she grabs her politics. It's a real grab bag. Like, some of it she learns on TikTok, some of it is reading like some serious theory, that goes back about 150 years, if you catch my drift. And so she's reading all this with an intensity and trying to fuse it together in conversation with her friends. So I feel like, this generation, they're too young even for Occupy Wall Street 10 years ago. So, they're coming up with, like, growing up with this idea of the 99% and the 1%. This isn't something that had to be bestowed onto them in their 20s or 30s or something like that, or even teens. It was grown up as a fact of ideological life, of understanding class on that level. And also, I think this generation this is the way I've been putting it, is more demographically diverse and less tolerant of intolerance than any generation in the history of the United States. And I think we have to create, the future of the planet, frankly, is dependent on creating space to allow them to lead and to try to put forward these transformative ideas. Now, that doesn't for one second, Peter, mean that people of older generations don't have a role, in figuring out how to shape this movement. It's just about trying to figure out where our place is and where we can contribute. Like, there are a lot of spaces where I, no matter what I said, would not be the best person to lead in that space. I mean, youth movements, people of color. I mean, it's remarkable the kinds of organizations that are being put together. But if I can do something like interview a lot of these young folks and get that to a broader audience and center their voices and not center my voice. Pull a little bit of a Studs Terkel with this thing, like you taught us, Peter, who I never read before your class. I mean, this is the sort of thing that I think we need to think creatively about what our role is, and not just being bystanders to what they're doing, but thinking like, what can I do based on my skill set to actually help them lead, but make sure that they're in the front doing this kind of organizing and that they feel supported. Because Mikhail said before, it like really sticks with me with the coach about just like that applying of this double burden on you to both lead and then also forgive. And it's like we have to have space where people like myself are providing like actual material, ideological, and even emotional support to the people who are so central to the work.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I'm thinking this forgive piece. I've often said that you also have to be willing to say sorry. I'm a firm believer that sometimes sorry works. It doesn't clear everything, but sometimes that's what people also need to hear. And you can't ask for forgiveness without apologizing, to me. And that's just something that I think you have to take with you. When I think about this change, I think for one, like you said, some of the stuff your teenager is learning is from the hardest books that some of us don't want to touch, right? And some of it is, TikTok dances where people are dancing in order to stay in an algorithm because they know they can't say it, but if they dance and show the captions of what they want to say, that's something that doesn't get shadow banned and blocked and removed. And I think what everyone has to do is kind of meet in that middle. I say if I learn something on TikTok, I'll Google it, right, and then get in this rabbit hole of different things. Um, I would love to learn something on TikTok, and I do, and feel like I can go to my parents and be like, "Did you know this? Can you tell me more about this?" Or I saw this thing on TikTok, and this is what's happening. I've had so many conversations with parents and grandparents and friends of friends, and I saw this thing on TikTok, and I saw this thing on Twitter, and they said this and this happened, and the response from my parents have been, "Well, yeah, that happened too." And they give me another example and another history and another story, and it's like this moment where we meet in the middle has allowed me to both take what I've learned here and take what I've learned here and kind of open up this view of something that I wouldn't know. And I think, understanding that you can learn in all ways. You can learn on TikTok, you can learn on Twitter, and you can also learn in the hard theory books and the really long textbooks. Like both of these worlds can exist at the same time. It doesn't have to just be, go pick up this book, and it doesn't just have to be, well, if I'm not learning it online, I'm not learning it at all. There's plenty of room for us to work together in the middle to kind of continue to move forward.
Both for that. We are starting to get some.
I can't hear you, Peter. Dave, oh, there you go.
Oh, okay. That we are getting questions, and if you're out there in the audience and you have a question, please type it into the chat on Zoom or the comment in Facebook. So here's a question. How might the sit-down strikes of the labor movement or the sit-in movement be compared to the kneel-in movement? Is part of the power of Kaepernick's kneel-in that it's such a natural thing to do? What do you think about those kinds? This is not my question, but I find it intriguing. What do you think about those connections, both of you, David and Mikhail?
I'm happy to jump in first.
Sure.
We're talking like about three different modes of protest with three very different avenues towards power. And of course, when we talk about the sit-down strikes, you're talking about economic power because they're bringing production to a halt. When you talk about the sit-ins, you're talking about the disruption of business as usual in a restaurant because of their Jim Crow laws. And you are disrupting the business of a Woolworths. in Greensboro. You are disrupting in 1930s the power of production. And so then you have to ask yourself the question, it's very interesting. What the hell is Colin Kaepernick disrupting? What the hell are these other folks who've taken me? What are they disrupting? And we have to be able to answer that question. I would argue that they are practicing a supreme ideological disruption.
Mm-hmm.
Because the difference between what they're doing, which is very distinct from the other two, is they're taking that knee during the national anthem. And when you do that, when you make that direct kind of challenge and affront to the national anthem, what you are saying is that there is a mammoth, yawning gap, a chasm between what this country promises and what it delivers, between what it says it stands for and the actual lived experiences of Black and brown people in particular. And also how you can have this home of the free and all the rest of it, home of the brave and all the rest of it, land of the free, while you have an inequality gap which renders any sort of advancement almost null and void for vast, vast, vast numbers of the population. So it's a different kind of disruption, but it's a disruption all the same, and one in which we're seeing the power of reverberate to this day.
Yeah, and just to quickly add on, I think absolutely the disruption is different, but it is a disruption. I always would say, like, what happened? That was always something we were addressed with. Well, what are you going to do next? You're just going to kneel and that's it. And it's like we've created this whirlwind of conversation from people. Like I said, there are people who, we called them boosters at the time, and they were older people in the community who would kind of like take in people from the team. If you're from, the East Coast and your parents can't come to all the games, they would come and support you and things like that. We're having conversations that we would not have, I firmly believe that they are not having, with their immediate family, with people they are running into, where we're opening doors and starting conversations, even the people who didn't want to hear it, right? It's probably bad, but it seemed as like they would come to these games and be so fumed to see us kneeling, and they would stay and watch us win and watch us be successful, and that had to have just really peeved them, right? But at that same time, this disruption to what is so regular to them, right? It had to sit in their mind. They had to sit with that, even if it was just for that. How long is the national anthem? A minute and a half, if that. But they had to really sit with that, and it didn't. Oh, it was never. Oh, they kneeled. It's over. Let's get back to basketball. It wasn't that. People continued to talk about it, and decisions were made after those moments. So a disruption, although different, but still a disruption as well.
I really resonate to the insights you're both sharing, and I'm thinking, Dave, of one of those books of 150 years ago that your daughter might look at, the volume 1 of Marx's Capital, and the idea of the reproduction of that capitalism is a system of reproduction as well as production. And my mentor, Freddie Perlman, and his pulling out from that chapter a book called The Reproduction of Daily Life. And how important, if we're not disrupting it, then we're participating in its reproduction. And I love Mikhail's point that even if it's only in a minute and a half, it stays with people. And obviously the energy that both of you are engaged with and riding with is an energy that has persisted and grown and morphed coming out of that action. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, just I actually, one of the people I interviewed said quite explicitly that if I've made you uncomfortable for 2 minutes, then maybe you understand how I feel every day. And I think maybe that's part of it too, is you are turning a mirror on a population that doesn't always want to see.
Yeah. So we have a question for Mikhail. Are you still in touch with your teammates? And, how did those experiences in 2016 stay with them? And what are they carrying with them into the work that they're doing now? If you know.
Yes, yeah. So some closer than others. I know for a lot of us, like I said, I went on and I graduated that year. So after the season, I fell off the face of the basketball sphere. But some of them, I know the next year was really hard. Um, they always joke because I think at the end I was painted as this rebel who was leading the team down this trail of destruction. Um, and maybe true, but also I think it was hard for them that next year. For me, I was like, you know what? It's so easy to wash my hands here. Um, and for some of them it wasn't. They had to come back. And I would distinctly remember talking. I still talk to one teammate more than some of the others, though we were in touch when we all got that phone call in 2020 about what's going on. But it was really brief and checking in, making sure you're okay. But one in particular, I had a horrible time. We were not allowed to kneel the following year. Not only that, but no one picked up the same way. It wasn't the same pushback and demand. And I think with some people, whispering about it, um, it was easy to kind of just, skirt under and fly really low, and we don't have to talk about it. And I think that was both the good and the bad of my relationship there. I felt that I could, in the beginning, that I could talk to my coaches and I could, make this statement and feel that I would get supported in some way. And it's unfortunate to know that the next year, those same people who, were standing with me or, kneeling with me in this sense, didn't feel like they had that power. Um, and I'm sure, there were things in place that happened and put them in that space, but it's rough. And I talked to, like I said, one in particular, and we are following and looking at things happening now at the university and with the team. I told them I'm stepping away. I unfollowed and muted. It was not right to me to now see all of these things being put on, and it was better for me. I can move on and be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was. I know it was really tough that next year, feeling that one, the person who may have, put more on the line. I also was in a unique position. I had a career-ending injury my last year, so the maybe fear of not playing or fear of losing playing time didn't exist to someone who didn't play. I was willing to take that step because of other things that I'd set up in that time frame that allowed me to. So yeah, I know that next year was really, really tough, and I know it's something we still are thinking about to this day. Those experiences, even though I always joke and say I'm over it, but I keep talking about it, and maybe I'm not over it, and that's okay. I don't have to be over it, but I can continue to share this story in the ways that I've grown from it to move forward in life.
Thank you. I want to take another question that was directed at Mikhail, mostly about the environment at UC San Diego, but I want to ask this a little bit differently than the questioner raised. We saw this last year, in the academic world, this very interesting development that the University of North Carolina refused to offer tenure to Nicole Hannah-Jones. They got pushback. They changed their position. She told them she didn't want it anymore, and she decided to go to Howard. Ta-Nehisi Coates also announced that he was going to Howard. Mikhail, I know that you spent time at Howard after UC San Diego. What do you think about the different environments in different institutions of higher education like UC San Diego, like Howard, and if you're willing to talk about it, like the University of Minnesota. And, what are your particularly African American students experiencing in these different kinds of institutions? And as you started out today talking about coaches and how coaches could be supportive or not, what about administrations and faculty mentors and the environment in different academic institutions? What can you offer us about that?
I think, I just feel like I should also say I went to UC Santa Barbara. I don't want, a strongly worded email from UC San Diego or Cal.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's okay. I just wanted to clear that up. I think for me, so it was, I remember meeting with some Black studies professors and getting their support in a way that was more than just um, faculty or people that have taught me in the past, but their support as Black people on this campus, their support as Black women on this campus, meant a lot. And it was reassuring to hear, like, you're fighting the right fight, like, don't give in, it's tough. And getting that support in a way that I didn't feel like I was getting, it really, I think it set the tone for me in a way that I wasn't expecting, and that transferred over to my time at Howard. Um, I remember writing that in my my letters of my application and things like that. It was, I had spent a time in a unique place where I didn't have as many Black mentors and faculty members and people that I could just feel like I could be myself and feel comfortable in. And going into this space and it being interested in what I want to be interested in, what I want to do, I need that. I want that. I crave that. Like, that will make this worthwhile to me. And it was a world of difference. The explanations to following why never happened. Well, why are you kneeling? And there wasn't a person at Howard that asked me that. I didn't need to provide that explanation. They knew why. Um, they knew the experience I was feeling. They understood where I was coming from, my perspective. Um, it was just a different ball game being in that space. Um, not always having to answer that why is a game changer in some way. Um, but that just, like I said, that doesn't mean that didn't happen for me at UC Santa Barbara. Like I mentioned, there were the BSU organization, they came out and supported various members of, the Chicana and Chicana Studies Department and associations and orgs, they came out and supported. It was being passed around from people who, both knew me, but knew other members on the team, heard the story, seen it in, the local newspaper and things like that. So having that support was so, mind blowing. And I think even more mind blowing when we didn't have that support and then got that support, it was like, what, this isn't, falling on the ears of no one who's listening. People are listening, people are supporting, people are believing, people are standing behind us, people are rooting for us, even when it seemed like the people that we wanted to root for us the most weren't. It really was a game changer for that experience. It was tough, but knowing that one game in particular, when everyone came and we had a section that went all the way back, and they sat there in silence, and it was a moment that I'll never forget, knowing that this is what support's supposed to feel like. This is what it's supposed to feel like to do something and feel uplifted by your community. It really is a game changer, and it did a lot for us. I think in a time where we felt like, what are we doing? What do people see? Yeah.
Thank you. So we have a question about veterans and what might either of you, and I expect more likely Dave, what do you know about incidents of veterans taking a knee in solidarity with athletes, with the cause of Black Lives Matter. I think, Dave, you and I might have had a little bit of an exchange in the last week that my old friend Jerry Lemke reached out and said that he would be watching, joining us today. And Jerry wrote this remarkable book, The Spitting Image, about the way Vietnam veterans both were treated and the ways that working class veterans responded to their experiences in Vietnam. So what do you know, Dave, about what kind of a space the military has been for any of this kind of symbolic protest?
Well, one thing I can say is that as soon as Colin Kaepernick took his knee and as soon as the spurious and scurrilous charges started being levied against him as it being an anti-military gesture, and by the way, I also want to say it was not an anti-military gesture, but honestly, so what if it was? You know, it's your right to protest whatever the hell you want. I mean, your boss is imposing a national anthem on you with a militaristic surroundings. If you want to say, I actually disagree with the motives of the U.S. state and I'm going to take a knee and I'll suffer the consequences, if so be it. So sometimes I think folks might have been a little too sensitive about the charges that it was somehow anti-military. But I also understand it because it's like, you know, it's an okie doke. You know, it's a very, very public and obvious way to alter consciousness about what he's doing. And it's a way to avoid talking about police violence, which they do not want to talk about. And they especially don't want to talk about, quite frankly, the connection between the military and police violence, whether we're talking about training, whether we're talking about equipment, or whether we're talking about an open door from troops who come back from overseas and immediately have jobs in a police department, which is problematic for a lot of reasons. But as soon as Colin Kaepernick took his knee, an organization started called Vets for Cap that just made very clear that they understood that the motivations were not aimed at the military and that they supported his right. You know, the basic line was, you know, we went to fight precisely so Colin Kaepernick could have the freedom to do what he's doing. And at least as an online presence in that first fateful fall of 2016, that was very intense and very appreciated at the time as well, both by Colin and by people who were trying so hard to keep the framing on the question exactly with the original knee.
Thank you. And I didn't know about Vets for Cap, and that's definitely something to, in the world of social media at least, to Google and see what we can find out about them. We have a question about kind of the, you know, here we are, Dave, you mentioned 10 years since Occupy. We started out just a month ago with 20 years since 9/11. And I'm the guy that wants to talk about what changes and what doesn't change. And so, you know, was there a kind of political consensus that began to be spun after 9/11 and ways that professional sports were used, whether playing the national anthem or what would go, you know, the seventh inning stretch that listens to America the Beautiful, or, you know, were there ways that part of this disruption that we were talking about earlier, that there was not necessarily a conspiracy, but a kind of leveraging of professional sports by the dominant culture that then gets disrupted by athletes taking a knee and this political consensus itself at least wobbles, if not cracks.
You first, Mikhail.
You knew I was still thinking, Dave. That's cheating.
I'll go. I'll roll. You want? I can roll. That was a big question for sure.
It's a big question.
I mean, I'll start just by saying that, you know, folks should read The Heritage by Howard Bryant. which is an interesting book because it's about 9/11, the militarization of sports, and how that we have to understand that if we also are going to understand this modern revolt of the black athlete.
Mm-hmm.
One is very connected to the other. And the interesting thing about the book is that it actually started as a book just about the role of 9/11 in sports. And then as Howard was writing it, you have, I interviewed Howard about the book. As he's writing it, you start seeing protests. So then the whole thesis of the book changed for him, because it's like, whoa, does one have anything to do with the other? And the answer is it certainly does, because what it does is it takes the anthem. And, the anthem is always a political statement. This particular anthem has a third verse we do not sing because it's so racist. It was written by someone who owned enslaved people, Francis Scott Key. It's a war anthem. There are a million things we can say about the anthem. But after 9/11, it wasn't just about supporting the flag and country and apple pie. I mean, it was about supporting a very specific military intervention overseas and the war on terror. And the expectation that athletes would be cheerleaders for the war on terror is one of the things that chafed up against the reality of living in racist America. And so, we're supposed to extol and support this country where they're killing people in the streets. As Colin Kaepernick said, where people are dead in the streets and cops are getting away with murder. So I think that contradiction ended up biting the NFL in the behind because they wanted to be able, they had a financial partnership with the Pentagon called Salute to Service. And so to have that get undermined by kneeling athletes, by Colin Kaepernick, was so unacceptable. But you don't have the kneeling athletes, you don't have Colin Kaepernick without the buildup of politics and bombast that you see in the lead up to 2016.
Thank you. Mikhail, anything you want to add to that?
I guess not so much. I was just thinking the same thing, how you were saying it's these cheerleaders were expected to, kind of take on that role. And I almost feel like it goes back to the grateful argument we were discussing. That again, how could you not do this or believe this? Like, you should be grateful that you have the opportunity to do this, right? There are so many people in the world who wish they could be in your position, and you choose to tarnish it by, demanding equality and justice. And that's not something that sits well with the people in charge. So I guess that's really all I would add, but it really just sits with that grateful feeling again. This expectation that you're not allowed to be different. You should be on the same page with everyone else because you should be grateful to have the position that you have.
Thank you. So, Dave, you know that the labor movement and unions are important to me, to the Eastside Freedom Library, to our visions of how America can change. We've been embroiled in very interesting conflicts here in the Twin Cities and I'm sure elsewhere about the role of police unions, the role of police, security guards, correctional officers within unions. What kind of stance should unions and the labor movement take around issues of racial justice? I know that in your work, particularly looking at the NFL, that you've had a relationship with the leadership of the NFL Players Association. I think that in the world of studying labor, as well as studying movements for racial justice, I think we often struggle with what's a defeat and what's a victory and what's a bit of both. And what do you make of what the NFL Players Association has or has not done to stand with Colin Kaepernick?
Well, I interviewed the executive director of the NFL Players Association, DeMaurice Smith, days after Kaepernick first made his stance. And, they said that they supported the right of players to express themselves. So they gave ideological support to Colin. But the two sides, and everybody has a side about why these things don't happen. The two sides couldn't really come together and figure out an action plan that involved the union. And I think that was a real error and mistake. Whose fault it was, I'm not going to adjudicate that here. But it's a damn shame, because the union felt like it was in a position to help with the struggle, but it takes two to dance, and they couldn't work out the dance steps. So there was ideological support, but there was no basis whatsoever for some sort of action support. Like, they could have done a sympathy strike for 1 week, to have Colin resigned. They could have done pickets. They could have been very creative. Actually, they could have done online campaigns. I mean, Colin Kaepernick was colluded against. I mean, that goes against everybody in the union. That represents a threat to every last union member, and it should have been a union issue, because this is what I've been saying from the beginning. This is a labor issue. This whole thing is a labor issue. Because yes, it's about police violence. Yes, it's about racial inequity. It's also about the fact that labor, I said this before, but labor and racial discipline is essential for the operating of the National Football League. And it's extremely autocratic. And when you have somebody who acts against that, then you're not acting with labor discipline. And then things get very, very, very thorny for all involved.
Back to, again, about the time that you were at Macalester in the mid-90s, there was quite an ongoing struggle at the Ford plant in St. Paul about management trying to get workers to do more work, and workers being in often the difficult position as an individual of saying to a foreman, this is not in my job description, I won't do this. And it led to workers being disciplined, several days off without pay, then several weeks off, and then the threat of discharge. And the one thing that the union did do is they created a fund to make the workers whole for any loss of pay that they might have experienced. And I wonder about, what Colin Kaepernick has struggled with materially in the time since, he's been blacklisted and without income.
Yeah.
And it just seems that's chilling for everybody, not just terrible for him, but chilling for everybody.
It has a chilling effect. There's no question. And I've had other people say, like, why don't we talk about this more? You actually have somebody who's been prevented from doing the job for which they are capable and qualified because of their political speech. And that is extremely chilling on a whole host of fronts. And Colin Kaepernick, he's got a bunch of projects coming out this year. He's done commercials with Nike, although it is worth pointing out that connection with Nike preceded the knee. So, you could look at this as Nike, for all the criticism they got for doing a Colin Kaepernick commercial. It was kind of like the biggest no duh in the world. When you have him under contract, you do something with that. Some people have said to me, "Oh, Colin Kaepernick as a figure who stands for social justice, he shouldn't be doing work with Nike." And I'm kind of like, yeah, like, I'm not some Nike booster or anything, but as you said, Peter, the guy has to earn something. And what's he supposed to do at that point? He's being prevented from making what he should be making and doing what he should be doing. And and then he has a lot of projects coming out this year. He's got people might know about this, like a Netflix thing coming out with Ava DuVernay. He's got a book coming out. So I think we're going to hear a lot from Colin Kaepernick in the coming year.
That's great. That's great. So we're starting to run low on time. I wonder if each of you might say a little bit about what's coming up for you. Uh, where where do you think the next year or two is going to take your focus in the work that you're doing? And Mikhail, I'd love to hear more about the way you're looking at social media and young women of color and how that where you're going with that research.
Sure. So for me, a lot of big dates as a PhD student are coming up. All the reading and writing. I'm moving into that stage, so a lot of that. But as far as my research is concerned, I always open up by telling people when I was 12, I had that one Disney Channel show, That's So Raven, that all the other Black girls were watching. And that was really it. And if it was older stuff that maybe I couldn't watch, or things that I just didn't really feel like I could place myself. And now I can't, there's TV shows and versions of things for everyone. There's access to online. It's a whole new world that's really being opened up. And I think that's what's like so cool, but also really, really tough. I trying to figure out who I was trying to be at 12 and 13 was hard enough, and I didn't have Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, um, all access all the time to kind of encourage or discourage me from doing different things with life. I was becoming myself with the immediate things around me, with my family, with my teammates, with my friends. And now we see that I always say that social media is another group, another peer group, another friend group, another team that you're dealing with. An additional cousin. It's its own kind of function in our lives now. Um, and it's a lot. I'm 26, and it's a lot for me as an adult, and I can't imagine being 12, 13, 14, trying to balance the same things. So that's really what I'm interested in, and why I think it's so critical to focus on, because we're just not talking about it in that way. Um, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, it's not just entertainment. It's not just scrolling on Twitter. Twitter now, when Twitter started in 2006, it was, hey, on my way to get a burrito, uh, catch me at Chipotle, right? And now it's the president uses Twitter. We were getting notifications about a global pandemic through Twitter. Um, People are using Facebook to connect. People are using TikTok to, learn about um, so many different things and breaking algorithms, and it's more than just online scrolling, a waste of time, as parents might assume. It's more than that, and it's giving adults, but also adolescents, teenagers, so much more than just fun and entertainment. Um, and I think that's we're living in a really special time to kind of look at those things.
Thank you. And Dave, I know you're in a whirlwind of promoting the Kaepernick Effect, and that you're doing events virtually with the Nation and with the Progressive, and I'm sure lots of other platforms as well. Have you thought about, beyond getting this book into people's hands,
Well,
where you want to go next?
I mean, Peter, part of why it's tough too is that I really do feel a sense of mission with this book. I'm taking any money I make from this book, and it's going to a group called Serve Your City DC, which did amazing mutual aid work when the pandemic first hit in DC. And Serve Your City bought 500 copies of the book, and they put them in backpacks to give to the kids.
Great.
And it's just like, I really want to see how far we can take this, of making Serve Your City grow as an organization, of making young people feel confident that, other people did it. I thought, Peter, you'd appreciate that one person said I should have called the book What to Expect When You're Protesting, because there's so many scenarios that come out of in the book, like What does your coach do? What do your teammates do? How do you respond to this? When do you respond to that? Like, there are all these different, almost like case studies is a word, but what's that thing where you role play? It's almost like you can role play through the stories in the book and figure out what you have to deal with. So I really want to see this through to the oomph degree, even more than anything I've ever done. After that, yeah, I've got some ideas percolating. You know, you always got to get percolating a little bit here. But you know, I'm going to play those cards close to the vest until I have something concrete to offer.
Great. Well, I want to encourage everyone, obviously, to buy the book, The Kaepernick Effect. Here at the Eastside Freedom Library, we like to encourage people to use independent bookstores, and of which there are many. I also want to extend an invitation to everyone to come on into the Eastside Freedom Library. We're still asking people to make appointments and commit to wearing a mask, but we have all 10 of Dave's books. Come on in and read. They get a whole shelf to themselves. Come on in and read some of them. This event was originally conceived and to some degree has continued to be a fundraiser for the Eastside Freedom Library, and we appreciate all of you who made donations as part of registering to watch this event. You could give more, and you can go to our website and hit that donate button, and help us fund more events and more projects and activities. I want to say about Dave that he visited us, I bet 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, and when I picked him up at the airport, he said, "I understand the nurses are on strike at United Hospital. Would you take me to the picket line before we go on and do anything else?" And this is a man after my heart, and very much deeply connected to the work that we're doing here at the Eastside Freedom Library. And it means the world to me, Dave, that you're out there and doing what you're doing, and how much hope you give me and the rest of us. And that for this event that you've introduced us to Mikhail, and who has now outed herself as 26 years old. And she's a young person to me, and I'm really excited by the new chapters that you're turning, and what we're going to learn about social media, and particularly what young women of color are going to learn from you, both directly and indirectly through social media. And not to put a big burden on your shoulders, but they look pretty sturdy to me, and I know you'll be doing great work. So I also again want to thank my colleagues, Sang Manny Ratzabout, Carla Reilly, and Clarence White, for their work in making this technology work. You folks out there don't know that we were scared to death as late as 3:59 and small change that something was wrong with the way but it worked. And they kept their cool, and we pulled this off. So, Mikhail, Dave, any last comment you want to make before we turn off for the evening?
Just a thank you from me. You know, Dave, like I think I told you last time, it's always fun talking to you. You're just, you know, you give this really cool, passionate energy that people just can easily vibe with. So thank you for including me with this, and just allowing me to be here. And Peter, thank you to you too. I can't wait to come to the library. I already told you I'm going to be there. I promise I am. So thank you both, and just for people for tuning in.
Just Mikhail, you blessed the book, and just grateful that you shared your experience. Shout out to Elizabeth Wrigley Field, who I think is watching.
She is.
Introduced me to Mikhail. I mean, really grateful about that. And Peter, I mean, what what can I say? When somebody who you look to as a mentor when you were 19 years old says something as kind as you're saying to me now at 47, which is what I am, I'll out myself to. You know, that's a life gift for real.
Wow.
I'll never forget that, Peter.
Wow.
Thank you for saying that.
Thank
And
you.
you still inspire me, Peter, with this library that you've gotten off the ground. I hope everybody supports it. Visiting it felt more like a pilgrimage than a stop through by the time I was done looking through everything you had there. And so everyone should support the library, and everyone should know that you are in it for all the right reasons, and that's what makes you such a treasure.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. So my colleagues have just reminded me that we're actually going to have a little bit of an informal, some time for informal chat. I don't know how they're going to pull it off, but if you're out there in Zoom land, you will be allowed to reveal yourselves. Is that what's going to happen, Carla?
And they have to log off to David.
Oh, and these two, Dave and Mikhail, have to log off of the Razzle Dazzle system that we were on and join the rest of us on Zoom. Good luck doing that, but probably Elizabeth Wrigleyfield and others would love to have a moment with you here virtually. Are you cool with that, Dave? Or
I'm a bit of a techno fool.
uh-huh.
I'll do my weirdest. Is all I'll try.
Okay, so there may be a moment of fear here for all of us, but hopefully we will reunite. Well, Clarence, you have explicit directions? No. Clarence says there were a lot of questions we didn't get to. Oh, okay.
Oh.
So they'll come up in the chat.